Golden Age child stars who sued their parents. Behind the winning smiles and precocious performances that charmed millions, many of Hollywood's Golden Age child stars harbored a devastating secret: the systematic financial exploitation orchestrated by the very people meant to protect them, their parents. While audiences watched these talented youngsters sing, dance, and act their way into America's hearts, behind the scenes unfolded a darker story of missing fortunes, manipulated contracts, and childhoods sacrificed for family profit. The Hollywood studio system thrived on young talent, with child performers generating millions in revenue during cinema's golden era. Yet this period predated meaningful legal protections for child actors, creating a perfect storm where ambitious parents, enabling studios, and inadequate laws conspired to separate these young performers from their earnings. Many child stars reached adulthood only to discover a shocking truth. Despite years of work and fame, they were penniless. For some, the ultimate recourse came through a painful public act, suing their own parents to recover what remained of their earnings or gain control of their careers. These legal battles weren't just about money. They represented desperate attempts to reclaim agency over lives that had been controlled by others since early childhood. The courtroom became the final stage where these former child stars performed their most dramatic role: advocate for their own basic rights. Today, we're exploring the heart-wrenching stories of Golden Age child performers who took the extraordinary step of legal action against their parents. Their cases not only reveal personal family tragedies, but highlight the systemic failures that allowed children to be treated as commodities rather than vulnerable individuals deserving protection. These lawsuits eventually helped spark the reforms that would better protect future generations of young performers, though these changes came too late for many of Hollywood's pioneering child stars. Join us as we uncover these poignant stories of betrayal, resilience, and the quest for justice that forever changed how we understand the true price of childhood fame. Number 1. Jackie Coogan, the lawsuit that created the Coogan Law. This next case wasn't just a family tragedy. It was the scandal that finally forced California to create basic protections for child performers after one of Hollywood's first child stars discovered his millions had vanished. Jackie Coogan became America's first major child star after Charlie Chaplin cast him in The Kid, 1921. His tearful performance captivated audiences, launching a phenomenally successful career that continued throughout the 1920s and early 1930s. Films like Oliver Twist and Tom Sawyer established Coogan as Hollywood's highest-paid child actor, earning an estimated $3 to $4 million, equivalent to over $50 million today, before reaching adulthood. Yet when Coogan turned 21 in 1935 and sought access to his fortune, he discovered a devastating reality. The money was gone. His mother, Lillian Coogan, and stepfather, Arthur Bernstein, had spent nearly all his earnings on furs, jewelry, exotic cars, and real estate, all legally, as California law at the time granted parents complete control over their minor children's earnings. When confronted, Coogan's mother delivered the now infamous response: "No promises were ever made to give Jackie anything. Every dollar a kid earns before he is 21 belongs to his parents." This shocking statement perfectly captured the mindset that had allowed countless child performers to be exploited by their families. In 1938, Coogan took the extraordinary step of suing his mother and stepfather for the remainder of his earnings. The lawsuit generated nationwide headlines, with many Americans shocked to learn that child performers had no legal right to their own income. After a lengthy and emotionally devastating legal battle, Coogan received a settlement of just $126,000, a small fraction of what he had earned. The public outrage surrounding Coogan's case led directly to the 1939 California Child Actors Bill, commonly known as the Coogan Law. This landmark legislation required that 15% of a child performer's earnings be set aside in a trust, later increased to 50%, established work-hour limitations, and mandated educational requirements for child actors. What makes Coogan's story particularly poignant is that even after this legal victory and legislative change, his financial struggles continued. To support himself, he took whatever roles he could find, eventually finding renewed fame in his 40s as Uncle Fester on The Addams Family television series. a remarkable second act for a performer who had once been one of Hollywood's wealthiest child stars. Coogan's lawsuit represented more than just a family dispute. It exposed systemic failures that had allowed the exploitation of child performers since cinema's earliest days. While the resulting legislation came too late to save his fortune, it established the first meaningful protections for future generations of young performers, a bittersweet legacy for Hollywood's original child star. Number 2. Shirley Temple, the child star who discovered she had only $44,000. The next case involves cinema's most iconic child performer, a star so valuable she single-handedly saved a studio from bankruptcy, only to discover her enormous earnings had largely vanished despite her parents' seemingly careful management. Shirley Temple was not just a successful child actor, but a cultural phenomenon whose films generated unprecedented revenue during the Great Depression. Between 1935 and 1938, she was Hollywood's top box office draw, with her films for Fox Film Corporation, later 20th Century Fox, earning an estimated $20 to $30 million when movie tickets cost just 25 cents. Her merchandise, from dolls to clothing lines, generated millions more. Unlike many child stars of the era, Temple appeared to have responsible parents. Her mother, Gertrude, closely supervised her career, and her father, George, a banker, established a trust for her earnings. This arrangement seemed to protect Shirley from the exploitation suffered by performers like Jackie Coogan. The truth proved more complicated. When Temple turned 21 in 1949 and gained access to her trust, she discovered it contained only $44,000, a shockingly small sum given her massive earning power. While not completely destitute like Coogan, she had received just a tiny fraction of the wealth her talent had generated. Though Temple initially avoided public confrontation, court records reveal she engaged in legal action against her parents over financial discrepancies. This process was handled much more discreetly than Coogan's high-profile lawsuit, with Temple preferring to resolve matters privately rather than generate headlines that might damage her family relationships. The financial arrangements that had depleted Temple's earnings were complex. Her contracts typically directed most income to her parents rather than her trust. Studio accounting practices further diminished her share through creative expense allocations. Even her merchandise revenue largely bypassed her, with licensing agreements structured to benefit the studio and her parents rather than Temple herself. What makes Temple's case particularly significant is how it demonstrated that even seemingly responsible parental management could result in financial harm to child performers in a system designed to enable exploitation. Despite appearing to have every advantage, supportive parents, careful oversight, established trusts, Temple still lost most of her earnings due to systemic failures in how child performers were compensated. Temple's response to this discovery helped define her legacy beyond her film career. Rather than allowing financial disappointment to derail her life, she rebuilt through a successful diplomatic career, eventually serving as U.S. ambassador to Ghana and Czechoslovakia. Her resilience in the face of financial betrayal represents one of Hollywood's most inspiring second acts. The quiet legal resolution of Temple's financial disputes with her parents received far less attention than her film achievements, but it represented another crucial step in establishing greater protections for child performers, demonstrating that even the industry's most beloved star had been vulnerable to exploitation despite every apparent safeguard. Number 3, the dead-end kids, multiple lawsuits against exploitative parents. This next case reveals how an entire group of child performers found themselves fighting legal battles against parents who had treated their talents as family meal tickets, demonstrating that exploitation was systematic rather than isolated to a few unfortunate cases. The Dead End Kids, a group of young actors including Leo Gorcey, Hunts Hall, Bobby Jordan, Gabriel Dell, and Billy Halep, rose to fame after appearing in the 1937 film Dead End. Their portrayal of tough street kids led to a successful series of films, including the popular Bowery Boys features that continued into the 1950s. Collectively, they represented one of Hollywood's most lucrative child acting franchises. Unlike individual child stars who might have unique financial arrangements, the similar experiences of the Dead End Kids revealed industry-wide patterns of exploitation. By the time they reached adulthood, most discovered that their substantial earnings had been mismanaged or completely depleted by their parents. Bobby Jordan's case proved particularly heartbreaking. After years of supporting his family through his acting, he sued his mother in 1945 for misappropriation of his earnings. Court records revealed she had treated his income as family property, using it for everything from household expenses to personal luxuries, while leaving Jordan with almost nothing. The lawsuit resulted in a modest settlement that represented only a small portion of what he had earned. Leo Gorcey took a different approach, using legal leverage to wrest control of his career from his father Bernard Gorcey when he turned 21. Though not a traditional lawsuit, this legal maneuvering involved court petitions to invalidate contracts his father had signed on his behalf. Gorcey's determination to gain financial independence later extended to demanding top billing and higher pay in Dead End Kids productions, a rare example of a former child star successfully reclaiming both creative and financial control. Billy Haylop's situation demonstrated how parental financial exploitation could have lifelong consequences. After discovering his earnings had been depleted, he filed legal action against his mother in the late 1940s. Though he obtained a judgment in his favor, little money remained to recover. The financial and emotional toll contributed to Haylop's struggles with substance abuse and career difficulties, eventually forcing him to work as a registered nurse to support himself despite having once been a famous actor. What makes the Dead End Kids cases particularly significant is how they demonstrated the widespread nature of financial exploitation across different families and circumstances. These weren't isolated incidents, but manifestations of a systemic problem within the industry. Their collective experiences helped build momentum for strengthening the Coogan Law in subsequent decades, as legislators recognized that the original protections had proven insufficient. The scattered legal challenges filed by members of this once famous group rarely made headlines individually, but together they illustrated how thoroughly the studio system enabled parental exploitation of child performers, an issue that extended far beyond the high-profile cases that had captured public attention. We've seen how Hollywood's brightest child stars discovered their fortunes had vanished and took the painful step of legal action against their own parents. But the most heartbreaking cases are yet to come. The next revelations expose even darker aspects of child star exploitation. Psychological abuse disguised as stage parenting, careers extended through dangerous substances, and young performers who discovered their financial exploitation was just the beginning of their parents' betrayal. These stories reveal that for many Golden Age child stars, the lawsuits over missing money were just the visible surface of much deeper family traumas that would affect them long after the camera stopped rolling. Number 4. Dickie Moore, the legal battle over a retirement fund. This next case reveals how even well-intentioned financial arrangements could become tools of control and exploitation when parents viewed their children's earnings as family property rather than the performer's rightful compensation. Dickie Moore began his Hollywood career as an infant, appearing in his first film at 11 months old. Throughout the 1930s, he remained steadily employed in features like Oliver Twist and Sergeant York, along with a stint in the Our Gang comedies. Unlike some child performers, Moore's parents, a newspaperman and a former actress, presented themselves as concerned about his financial future, supposedly establishing a retirement fund for his earnings. The reality proved quite different. When Moore reached adulthood and sought access to this fund, he discovered most of his earnings had been spent on family living expenses, with his father claiming these expenditures were necessary to support Moore's career. This discovery led to legal action in the late 1940s as Moore sought to recover what remained of his childhood earnings. What makes Moore's case particularly notable is how it exposed the common practice of parents justifying their use of a child's income as necessary career expenses. His father had maintained meticulous records of expenditures supposedly related to Moore's acting career, everything from family housing, claimed as necessary to maintain a proper image, to family vehicles needed for transportation to auditions and sets. These creative accounting practices had effectively transformed Moore's earnings into a family slush fund, while maintaining the appearance of financial responsibility. Moore's lawsuit resulted in a modest settlement, but its greater significance came through exposing how easily parents could circumvent even the limited protections established by the original Coogan Law. The trust requirements could be undermined through expansive definitions of career-related expenses that allowed parents to legally access funds that should have been preserved for the child performer. Unlike some former child actors who remained bitter about their exploitation, Moore channeled his experiences into advocacy. He later conducted extensive interviews with other former child stars for his book Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, But Don't Have Sex or Take the Car, documenting the widespread financial and emotional challenges faced by young performers. This work helped create momentum for strengthening legal protections in subsequent decades. Moore's case illustrated how parental exploitation often operated under the guise of responsible management, making it more difficult to detect and prevent than outright theft. His legal challenge helped establish that career expenses needed clearer definition and limitations to prevent parents from using this loophole to access their children's Number 5. Beverly Washburn, fighting for control of her career. The next case reveals how lawsuits by child performers weren't always about recovering money. Sometimes they represented desperate attempts to gain basic control over their careers and working conditions after years of parental domination. Beverly Washburn began acting at age 6, appearing in classics like Old Yeller and Shane, along with numerous television shows including Leave It to Beaver and The Lone Ranger. Throughout her childhood career, her mother served as her manager, making all decisions about which roles she would accept and controlling every aspect of her professional life. As Washburn approached adulthood, she sought greater input into her career choices, particularly wanting to transition to more mature roles that would allow her to develop as an actress. When her mother continued forcing her to audition exclusively for juvenile parts that maintained her child star image, Washburn took the extraordinary step of legal action to gain professional independence. In 1962, at age 18, Washburn filed for emancipation from her mother's professional control. While not a traditional lawsuit seeking financial compensation, this legal proceeding directly challenged her mother's authority to manage her career and earnings. The court filings revealed troubling patterns of control, including allegations that Washburn's mother had turned down appropriate transitional roles that might have helped her establish an adult career. What makes Washburn's case particularly significant is how it highlighted the psychological aspects of child performer exploitation. The legal documents detailed not just financial control, but the emotional consequences of having one's creative and professional development subordinated to a parent's vision. Washburn's courtroom testimony described feeling like a professional child rather than a developing artist, a sentiment that resonated with many former child performers. The court ruled in Washburn's favor, granting her independence from her mother's management. However, the victory came too late to salvage her transition to adult roles. Having been pigeonholed as a child performer for so long, Washburn struggled to establish herself in more mature parts, eventually finding work primarily in horror films and minor television roles. Washburn's legal challenge represented a different kind of exploitation case, one focused not on missing money, but on the psychological and career damage caused by excessive parental control. Her testimony helped expand understanding of child performer protection beyond financial considerations to include developmental and emotional factors that affected young actors' well-being and professional futures. Though Washburn's case received less publicity than financial lawsuits involving larger sums, it helped establish important precedents regarding the rights of young performers to eventually gain agency over their own careers, principles that would influence later enhancements to child performer protections. Number 6. Baby Peggy, seeking justice after 70 years of exploitation. This next case involves one of silent cinema's biggest child stars, whose legal efforts for recognition and compensation continued for 7 decades, demonstrating both the long-term consequences of early exploitation and the extraordinary determination of those seeking to right historical wrongs. Diana Sarah Carey, known professionally as Baby Peggy, was one of Hollywood's first major child stars. Between 1921 and 1924, she made over 150 short films and several features, earning $1.5 million annually, equivalent to over $22 million today at the peak of her fame. Her image appeared on merchandise across America, and her films were major box office attractions. By age 11, however, Baby Peggy's career had collapsed, and her fortune had vanished, spent by her parents on extravagant living and questionable investments. Unlike some child stars who discovered their financial exploitation only upon reaching adulthood, Carey and her family experienced financial ruin while she was still a child, forcing her to support them through vaudeville appearances, and later work as an extra. What makes Carrie's case extraordinary is the longevity of her fight for justice. While she did not file a traditional lawsuit against her parents, she engaged in decades-long legal efforts to receive compensation for her silent films, which continued to generate revenue through re-release and television broadcast without any payment to her. In the 1960s, Carrie began legal proceedings to assert her rights to compensation for her work, discovering that complex contractual arrangements had effectively separated her from any ownership interest in her films. These legal challenges continued intermittently for decades, with Carrie fighting not just for financial compensation, but for recognition of the exploitation she had experienced. Perhaps most remarkably, Carrie's legal efforts continued into her 90s. In 2012, at age 94, she was still pursuing recognition and compensation related to her films through the Screen Actors Guild and various film preservation organizations. Though these late-life efforts yielded limited financial results, they helped raise awareness about the historical exploitation of child performers. Carrie transformed her experiences into advocacy, writing the memoir, Whatever Happened to Baby Peggy, and speaking frequently about child performer exploitation. Her perspectives proved particularly valuable because they spanned nearly the entire history of cinema, from the completely unregulated silent era through the development of modern child performer protections. While Carrie's lifetime of legal challenges never resulted in significant financial recovery, they contributed substantially to historical understanding of child performer exploitation and helped inform ongoing efforts to strengthen protections. Her persistence in seeking justice, continuing well into the 21st century, demonstrated how the consequences of early exploitation could echo throughout an entire lifetime. Number 7. Carl Alfalfa Switzer, the Our Gang star's final legal battle. The next case reveals how financial exploitation could lead to tragic consequences when former child stars found themselves without resources or opportunities after their earning potential had been exhausted by their parents. Carl Switzer became internationally famous playing Alfalfa in the Our Gang, later known as The Little Rascals, comedy shorts from 1935 to 1940. His distinctive cowlick, freckles, and off-key singing made him one of the series' most recognizable and beloved characters. Despite appearing in over 60 shorts that would be broadcast for decades, Switzer earned relatively modest wages that were fully controlled by his parents. Unlike some child performers who took legal action upon reaching adulthood, Switzer initially avoided confrontation with his parents. However, court records reveal that in the late 1940s, he did engage in legal proceedings to gain access to whatever remained of his earnings, discovering that almost nothing had been preserved despite his years of work. What makes Switzer's case particularly tragic is how directly his financial exploitation contributed to his untimely death. Unable to successfully transition to adult roles and having received none of the financial benefits from his years of work, Switzer struggled to support himself through a series of odd jobs, including bartending, hunting guide, and occasional bit parts in films. These financial pressures culminated in a 1959 dispute over a $50 debt, money Switzer felt he was owed for work as a hunting guide. The confrontation turned violent, resulting in Switzer being fatally shot at age 31. Court testimony during the subsequent manslaughter trial, which ended in acquittal, repeatedly referenced Switzer's desperate financial situation despite his former fame, a situation that stemmed directly from having received none of his childhood earnings. Switzer's brief legal efforts to recover his earnings never received significant public attention, overshadowed by his struggles to find work and ultimately by the sensational circumstances of his death. Yet these quiet court proceedings represented another example of a former child star attempting to gain some benefit from years of work that had financially benefited only his parents. The tragic arc of Switzer's life, from beloved child star to struggling adult killed over a $50 dispute, became a powerful symbol of child performer exploitation's potential consequences. His story has been frequently cited in legislative hearings on strengthening child performer protections, illustrating how early financial exploitation can create vulnerability throughout an entire life. While Switzer's legal actions against his parents yielded little financial recovery, the circumstances of his life and death death contributed significantly to growing awareness about the need for stronger protections for child performers, protections that might have given him the financial security to avoid the desperate circumstances that ultimately led to his death. These cases of Golden Age child stars suing their parents reveal much more than just individual family tragedies. Collectively, they expose the systemic exploitation enabled by an entertainment industry that valued child performers for their immediate profit potential while disregarding their long-term welfare. Jackie Coogan discovering the millions he earned were legally his parents' property. Shirley Temple finding just $44,000 remaining from her years as Hollywood's top box office draw. The Dead-End Kids fighting separate legal battles that revealed identical patterns of exploitation. These weren't just family disputes, but evidence of an industry-wide failure to protect its youngest contributors. If you found this exploration of Hollywood's treatment of child performers illuminating, hit that like button and subscribe for more examinations of film history that go beyond the glamorous surface. Until next time, remember that behind many of cinema's most heartwarming childhood performances lie stories of exploitation that eventually led to greater protection for the young performers who followed.